Everyone already knew who he would choose. That was the problem. In places like this, choices were never surprising. They were expected, predictable, controlled. The restaurant moved with quiet precision, glasses placed gently, voices lowered, power disguised as elegance. Every detail existed to serve people who never had to ask twice. Amara Okafor understood that world better than most. Not because she belonged to it, but because she knew how to disappear inside it. She moved without drawing attention. Orders memorized before they were spoken. Steps measured, voice off, eyes lowered just enough to avoid being remembered. Invisibility wasn't weakness. It was survival. Because in rooms filled with power, being noticed often came with consequences. So she made sure nothing about her invited questions. Nothing lingered. Nothing stayed. To everyone else she was just another waitress. Temporary. Replaceable. Forgotten the moment she walked away. But what Amara didn't know was that someone had already noticed. Not the managers watching for mistakes. Not the guests too distracted by status. But the one man in the room who never missed anything. He entered without noise. Yet the atmosphere shifted anyway. Conversations softened. Movements adjusted. Power didn't announce itself. Settled. Beside him stood Han Sujin. Perfect. Composed. Exactly where she was expected to be. She belonged. Everything about her fit the life he controlled. And for a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Until it wasn't. Because while the room focused on Sujin, Kongsuk's attention moved elsewhere. Not to the center, but to the edges. To the one person who wasn't supposed to matter. He watched the way she moved. The precision. The restraint. The silence that wasn't empty, but controlled. It wasn't weakness he saw. It was something hidden. Something real. And in a world built on power and appearances, that was the one thing he could not ignore. Amara made one small mistake. Just enough. A glass placed a second too late. Paused too long. The kind of moment everyone else would dismiss. Or punish. The room reacted as expected. But Kongsuk didn't. He was already watching. Already deciding. And when the balance shifted, when the system revealed exactly how it treated someone like her, he didn't look away. For the first time, someone powerful saw her. Not as a waitress. Not as background. But as something worth choosing. And in that moment, everything changed. Because when a man like Choi Kongsuk shifts his attention, it's never just a glance. It's a decision. And decisions like his don't just change lives. They rewrite them. Amara Okafor had learned early that being noticed was rarely a good thing. So she stopped trying. It wasn't something anyone taught her directly. It was something she understood over time. The way certain girls were remembered and others were not. The way attention lingered longer on some, and passed over others without consequence. She chose to be the one it passed over. In the restaurant that choice became routine. She arrived before most of the staff, when the air was still quiet and untouched by expectation. The tables stood empty, polished to perfection. Glassware aligned with precision. Everything in its place. Amara liked that part. Order made things easier. Predictable. Controlled. She moved through her tasks without hesitation. Checking settings, adjusting details others wouldn't notice, preparing for people who would never think about who made their experience seamless. By the time the doors opened, she was already invisible. Not because she wasn't there, but because she made sure nothing about her stayed. Her uniform was simple, clean, neutral. Nothing that drew the eye. Her posture steady. Her movements efficient. Her voice soft enough to be heard, but never remembered. She didn't rush. Rushing caused mistakes. Mistakes caused attention. And attention never ended well. So she perfected timing instead. Plates arrived exactly when needed. Drinks refilled before they were requested. Tables cleared without interruption. She worked between moments, never inside them. To the guests she was part of the environment. Like the lighting, Like the music, present but not personal. That was how she kept things safe. The other staff noticed her, of course, but not in a way that mattered. She wasn't loud, didn't complain, didn't compete. She took her shifts, did her work, and left without creating friction. Managers like that. Reliable, easy, replaceable. It was a quiet position to exist in. And Amara accepted it. Because the alternative required something she didn't allow herself to have. Visibility. There were moments, though, small ones, when she felt the weight of it. A customer speaking over her like she wasn't there. A complaint directed at her without looking at her. A mistake blamed on her simply because she was closest. She absorbed it all the same way. Silently. Correcting what needed to be corrected. Apologizing when necessary. Moving on before it could become something bigger. Because in places like this, fairness wasn't the priority. Smoothness was. And Amara was very good at keeping things smooth. She kept her world small. Orders. Tables. Taming. Nothing more. No conversations that lingered. No connections that complicated things. No presence that invited questions. If someone asked how she was doing, she answered the same way every time. I'm fine. Even when she wasn't. Especially then. By the time the evening crowds arrived, the ones that mattered, the ones that carried influence, the restaurant transformed. Voices lowered. Attention sharpened. And the rules became stricter. Amara adjusted with it. She always did. Because invisibility wasn't just something she practiced. It was something she depended on. A way to exist without becoming a problem. A way to survive without being chosen. And for a long time, that had been enough. Until the night someone decided to look at her. And not look away. They arrived without announcement. They didn't need one. The shift happened before anyone saw them. Conversations softened. Movements slowed. The quiet rhythm of the restaurant adjusted, almost instinctively, as if something had entered the room that required space. Power rarely introduced itself. It was recognized. Amara noticed it the way she noticed everything else, indirectly. Pause in the air. Change in posture. The subtle tension that meant someone important had just walked in. She didn't look immediately. She never did. Looking too quickly made things obvious. Obvious drew attention. So she continued what she was doing, finishing a table, adjusting a setting, letting the moment pass just enough. Then she glanced. Choi Kong-suk stood near the entrance. Ill. Controlled. Unmoved by the quiet shift he had caused. He didn't need to scan the room. The room adjusted around him. Dressed in a dark tailored suit. His presence was not loud, but it was undeniable. There was something precise in the way he carried himself. Something that suggested everything around him existed within his awareness. Beside him stood Han Soo-jin. And unlike him, she was meant to be seen. Elegant. Composed. Effortless in a way that didn't need to be explained. Every detail about her, her posture, her expression, the way she moved, fit perfectly into the space they occupied. She didn't adjust to the room. The room adjusted to her. They looked exactly as people expected them to look. Balanced. Power beside perfection. A couple that made sense. Amara looked away first. Not because there was anything to hide, but because there was nothing for her to see. People like them existed in a different world. A world that ran parallel to hers, close enough to observe, but never to enter. She had learned that early. So she returned to her work. Orders. Taming. Movement. But even without looking, she could feel it. The way the staff shifted around them. The increased attention. The careful precision in every action taken near their table. Important guests required flawless service. No delays. No mistakes. No attention for the wrong reasons. Amara understood the assignment without being told. She was the one chosen to serve their table. Not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She approached with the same controlled calm she always carried. Steps measured. Expression neutral. Voice steady. Good evening. Her tone was soft, professional, forgettable. Exactly as intended. Sujin acknowledged her first. A brief glance. Polite. Distant. The kind of acknowledgement that didn't linger. Amara expected that. Was normal. Expected. Kongsuk didn't respond immediately. And for a moment, Amara assumed he wouldn't. Most didn't. But something shifted. Subtle. Barely noticeable. His gaze moved. Not across the room. Not to the menu. But to her. Amara felt it before she understood it. That slight pause. That change in the air that had nothing to do with movement and everything to do with attention. She didn't react. Didn't hesitate. Didn't give it meaning. Because attention, no matter how small, was something she had trained herself to ignore. So she continued. Took their order. Memorized the details. Stepped away at the exact moment expected. Efficient. Invisible. Untouched by the moment. At least, that was how it was supposed to be. But as she moved away, something remained. Not visible. Not spoken. But present. Because for the first time since they entered, Choi Kongsuk wasn't looking at the person beside him. He was watching the one who wasn't supposed to matter. And he didn't look away. The rules were never written down. They didn't need to be. Everyone who worked there understood them eventually. Amara learned them without being told. Power sat at the top. Everything else adjusted beneath it. The restaurant didn't just serve food. It served importance. Status was measured in the way tables were placed, in who received immediate attention, in whose requests became priorities. And people like Amara existed somewhere in between. Necessary, but never equal. She moved through those rules the way she moved through everything else. Quietly, carefully, without resistance. Because resisting meant being seen. And being seen meant being corrected. Started with small things. A guest snapping their fingers instead of speaking. Complaint delivered without eye contact. A tone that suggested she was part of the service, not a person within it. Amara responded the same way every time. Yes, sir. Of course. I'll fix that immediately. No hesitation. No emotion. Because emotion complicated things. And complications drew attention. There were other rules too. The ones the staff never spoke about directly. If a mistake happened, it moved downward. Blame followed the easiest path. And the easiest path was always someone like her. Amara understood that. So she prevented mistakes before they happened. And when something slipped, she absorbed it. A glass misplaced. A delay caused by the kitchen. A misunderstanding that wasn't hers. It didn't matter. She was closest. That was enough. Managers valued efficiency, not fairness. As long as the table was satisfied, the system worked. And Amara was very good at making sure it worked. She kept her head down. Her voice even. Her presence controlled. Because control was the only thing she had. The rest belonged to the people she served. That night was no different. The restaurant moved around Kongsuk and Sujin with careful precision. Every detail sharpened. Every staff member aware of the weight their presence carried. Important guests changed the rules. Or rather, they revealed them more clearly. Amara adjusted without thinking. She monitored their table from a distance, timing their courses, anticipating needs, ensuring nothing disrupted the experience. It was seamless, until it wasn't. It was something small. It always was. A dish delayed longer than expected. A shift in the kitchen that didn't reach the table in time. A glance from Sujin, subtle but enough. The kind of glance that didn't ask a question. It expected correction. Amara moved immediately, explaining, apologizing, adjusting the situation before it could become something larger. Her voice stayed calm, controlled, professional. But the response she received wasn't. You should have checked this earlier. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were directed at her. Clear. Final. Amara nodded. Course. Because that was the rule. It didn't matter that the mistake wasn't hers. It mattered that she was standing there. And in that moment, she represented the failure. so she accepted it. I apologize. Simple. Efficient. Enough to keep things moving. The table returned to normal. The system corrected itself. Everything continued, just as it always did. But something had shifted. Not in the room. Not in the system. But in one place that rarely changed. Kungsuk's attention. Because while everyone else saw a mistake being handled, he saw something else. Not error. Not incompetence. But a pattern. And once he noticed it, he didn't ignore it. Because men like him didn't follow the rules. They decided which ones mattered. And for the first time that night, something about the system stopped working the way it was supposed to. Kungsuk did not react immediately. He never did. Reaction was for people who needed time to understand what they were seeing. He understood quickly. What interested him was what came after. From where he sat, the restaurant unfolded exactly as expected. Movement precise. Service controlled. Every detail arranged to maintain the illusion of perfection. Sujin continued speaking across from him, her voice calm, measured, fitting seamlessly into the environment that had always belonged to her. Kungsuk listened, or at least he appeared to, because his attention had already shifted, not to the center of the room, but to the edges. To her, Amara moved the same way she had before. Nothing about her had changed. And yet, everything had. Now that he had noticed it, he could see it clearly. The way she adjusted her steps to avoid crossing into anyone's line of sight. The way her hands remained steady even after being corrected for something that wasn't hers. The way her expression stayed neutral. Not empty but controlled. It wasn't submission. It was discipline. That distinction mattered. Kungsuk leaned back slightly. His gaze steady but unobtrusive. He wasn't watching her the way others might, with curiosity or interest. He was studying her, the same way he studied patterns. And she was a pattern, one that didn't fit the surface of the room. A waitress should have reacted, defended herself, shown irritation, let something slip. But she hadn't. She absorbed it, adjusted, moved on, as if it had already been expected, as if it had happened before. That was what held his attention, not the mistake, not the correction, but the familiarity of it. Sujin paused, noticing the shift before she could name it. Are you listening? Kungsuk's gaze returned to her without delay. Yes. The answer was immediate, accurate enough to pass, but not complete. Sujin held his gaze for a moment longer than usual, searching for something beneath it. Then she smiled, controlled, elegant, and continued. Kungsuk's attention moved again. Back to the room. Back to the pattern. Amara returned with the next course, placing each item with the same precision as before. No hesitation. No trace of the earlier correction. Clean. Efficient. Invisible. But not to him. This time he didn't look away when she approached. He watched the details. The slight pause before she set the plate down, just enough to ensure it aligned perfectly. The way her eyes flickered briefly, not toward them, but toward the table itself. Focused, not avoidant. There was intention in everything she did. An intention always meant something. You've been here long, he asked. The question was directed at her. Not casually, deliberately. Amara stilled for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. Yes, sir. Her voice remained steady. Professional. Unchanged. How long? 3 years. Short. Direct. No extra information. Exactly what was required. Nothing more. Kungsuk nodded once, as if confirming something. Then he said nothing else. But the silence that followed was different. 'Cause now, the interaction existed. Sujin noticed it. Not the words. The shift. The fact that his attention had moved. And stayed. Amara stepped back at the appropriate moment. Turning away. Returning to the space she was meant to occupy. But something had already changed. Because invisibility only worked when no one chose to break it. And Kungsuk had. Not loudly. Not completely. But enough. enough to see what others ignored. Enough to understand that what stood in front of him wasn't just a waitress following instructions. It was someone who had learned how to exist inside a system, without ever belonging to it. That was something he couldn't overlook. Because men like Choi Kong-suk didn't just notice differences, they followed them, until they understood exactly why they existed. It happened near the end of the night. The kind of moment most people would forget. Insignificant, easily dismissed. But in places like this, small moments had a way of revealing everything. The restaurant was at its peak. Voices layered over soft music, movement constant but controlled, orders flowing in rhythm, staff adjusting seamlessly to the pressure. Amara moved through it the way she always did. Precise, measured, invisible. She carried a tray toward Kong-suk's table, her steps steady, her focus fixed on timing and placement. Everything aligned the way it should. Until someone else moved first. A guest from the adjacent table shifted suddenly, standing without warning. The space narrowed. The balance changed. Amara adjusted instinctively, but not fast enough. The tray tilted. A glass slipped. It didn't shatter, but it hit the edge of the table hard enough to spill, just enough to disrupt the perfect surface. Silence followed. Not complete, but sharp, focused. The kind of silence that isolates a moment and holds it in place. Amara didn't freeze. She never did. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, already reaching to correct it. Napkin. Replacement. Movement controlled, efficient, practiced. The spill was minor. Fixable. Contained. But the reaction wasn't. Sujin leaned back slightly, her expression shifting. Not dramatically but enough. Displeasure. Refined. Measured. But unmistakable. That shouldn't have happened. The words were calm. But they didn't leave room for interpretation. Amara nodded. "Course. I apologize." Her voice remained even, unshaken. But before she could continue, another voice entered. Not from the table. From behind. "What's going on here?" The manager. Already approaching. Already assessing. His gaze moved quickly. Table, spill, guest. Then settled on Amara. Not the situation. Not the cause. "It was my responsibility," she said before he could ask. The words came automatically. Reflex. Because she already knew how this worked. The manager didn't question it. Didn't pause. Didn't look further. "You need to be more careful," he said. His tone low but firm enough to carry authority. "We can't afford mistakes like this. Not at this level." Amara nodded again. "Yes, sir." The guest who caused the shift had already sat back down. Uninvolved. Unnoticed. The system had corrected itself. Exactly as designed. The spill was cleaned. The table reset. New glass placed. Everything restored to its original state. Smooth. Seamless. As if nothing had happened. Except something had. Because from across the table, Kong-suk hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't intervened. But he had watched. Every detail. Because the reaction. The conclusion. And more importantly, what had been ignored. His gaze shifted briefly to the man at the adjacent table. Then back to Amara. Still standing. Still composed. Still accepting something that wasn't hers. That was when it became clear. This wasn't about a mistake. It was about how mistakes were assigned. And once that pattern revealed itself, it couldn't be unseen. Sujin reached for her glass. Her expression already returned to normal. The moment had passed. To her, it was finished. To everyone else, it was irrelevant. But Kong-suk's attention didn't move. Not this time. Because what he had just seen wasn't an accident. It was structure. And structure was something he understood better than anyone in the room. Amara stepped away when she was no longer needed. Returning to the background. Returning to invisibility. As if nothing had changed. But this time, someone had seen the difference. And unlike everyone else, he wasn't willing to ignore it. Because small mistakes didn't interest him. Patterns did. And this one was no longer small. The room recovered quickly. It always did. Conversations resumed. Glasses lifted. The rhythm returned to what it had been before the interruption. To anyone watching, the moment had already dissolved, absorbed into the smooth surface the restaurant worked so hard to maintain. But not everything returned to its place. Kong-suk's attention didn't. He remained seated, composed, exactly as expected. But his focus had shifted. Quietly, completely. Not toward the center of the table. Not toward Sun. But toward the space where Amara had disappeared. He didn't turn to follow her. He didn't need to. He had already mapped her movement. The way she moved between tables. The way she adjusted her pace depending on who she approached. The way she existed just outside the line of sight, present without being acknowledged. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. And now that he understood it, he couldn't ignore it. Sujin continued speaking, her voice smooth, her presence steady. She noticed things. Subtle shifts, unspoken changes. But this wasn't something she could name yet. Not clearly. Not completely. "You're distracted," she said lightly. Kong-suk's gaze returned to her without delay. No. The answer was simple. Controlled. But not entirely true. Sujin held his eyes for a moment longer, measuring something she didn't fully understand. Then she let it go. Now. Kong-suk's attention moved again. Back to the room. Back to her. Amara had returned to her routine. No hesitation. No change in rhythm. If the earlier incident had affected her, it didn't show. Her movements were as precise as before. Her expression as neutral. Her presence as controlled. As if nothing had happened. That, more than anything, confirmed it. She wasn't reacting. She was continuing. And that meant she was used to it. Kong-suk leaned forward slightly, resting his hand against the table. Small movement. Unremarkable. But intentional. When Amara approached again, it was for something minor. A refill, a quiet adjustment, a detail that didn't require attention. But he gave it anyway. "You didn't cause that." The words were low. Measured. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Amara paused. Just briefly. The smallest break in her rhythm. "It's fine." The answer came the same way everything else did. Controlled. Professional. Dismissive of anything that might complicate the moment. But Kong-suk didn't look away. "It wasn't your mistake." This time it wasn't an observation. It was a correction. Amara's grip tightened slightly on the glass she was holding. Barely noticeable. But enough. "It's been handled," she replied. Still calm. Still distant. Still refusing the space he was creating. Kong-suk studied her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. Not because he agreed. But because he understood. She wasn't denying it because she believed it. She was denying it because it was safer. That was what changed everything. Amara stepped back, ready to leave the interaction behind. To return to the place she had always stayed. Unnoticed. Untouched. But this time, he didn't let it end there. "Amara." Name. Spoken without hesitation. Without checking. Without asking. He turned. Not quickly. But fully. And for the first time since the night began. She looked directly at him. Not past him. Not around him. Him. "How do you know my name?" she asked. The question was quiet. But real. Kong-suk's expression didn't change. "It was on your tag." Simple. True. But not the reason. The reason was something else. Something he didn't say. He had noticed it earlier. Just like everything else. And unlike everyone else, he had chosen to remember it. Amara held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then she looked away. Because holding that kind of attention was dangerous. More dangerous than mistakes. More dangerous than blame. Because this kind of attention didn't pass. And as she stepped back into the rhythm of the room, one thing became clear. She could return to invisibility. She could continue as she always had. But it wouldn't be the same. 'Cause now, someone had chosen to see her. And men like Choi Kang didn't shift their attention without a reason, or walk away from it once they had. Sujin didn't react immediately. She never did. Reaction in her world was something to be measured. Controlled. Nothing was given without purpose, and nothing was revealed without intent. But she noticed. She always noticed. Not the obvious things. Not the words spoken or the brief exchange that passed between Kong-suk and the waitress. Those could be dismissed. What she noticed was the shift. The way his attention lingered a second too long. The way silence settled differently between them. The way his focus, usually precise and contained, had moved somewhere it didn't belong. It wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't normal. Sujin set her glass down gently, her expression unchanged. Elegant. Composed. Exactly what the room expected to see. But her awareness sharpened. She watched him without appearing to. The angle of his gaze. The direction of his attention. The subtle way he leaned, not toward her, but slightly away, as if something outside their table held more weight than the conversation between them. That was new. Kong-suk didn't divide his attention. He chose where it went, and he kept it there. Sujin followed that line of attention. Not directly. Never directly. But enough. And she saw her. Amara moved between tables, unchanged, unaffected, continuing her work with the same quiet precision as before. Nothing about her demanded attention. That was what made it noticeable. Because Kong-suk was still watching. Sujin's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass. Small movement. Barely visible. But deliberate. She understood something then. This wasn't curiosity. Curiosity passed. This didn't. What is it? Her voice was soft, like, almost casual, but it carried intent. Kong-suk looked at her. Fully. Present. But not entirely. Nothing, he said. The answer was immediate. Controlled. And incomplete. Sujin held his gaze, her smile faint but precise. You don't look at nothing like that. Was. The kind that didn't break the moment but deepened it. Kong-suk didn't respond. That told her more than words would have. Because silence from him was never empty. It was a decision. Sujin's gaze shifted again briefly toward Amara. Assessing. Not emotionally. Strategically. A waitress. Quiet. Unremarkable. Exactly the kind of person no one paid attention to. Exactly the kind of person that should not matter. So why did she? That was the question. Not out of insecurity, but out of understanding. Sujin didn't fear competition. She evaluated it. And right now, she couldn't see it. Which meant it wasn't visible. Her attention returned to Kong-suk. You're making her uncomfortable, she said lightly. Not as a complaint. As a statement. He didn't deny it. She's already uncomfortable, he replied. The words were calm. Certain. And they landed differently. Because they weren't about the moment. They were about something else. Something ongoing. Sujin's expression stilled for a fraction of a second. Then smooth. Understanding settled in. Not complete. But enough. This wasn't about interest. Not in the way she knew it. It was something more deliberate. And that made it more dangerous. Because Kong-suk didn't act without reason. And when he found something worth his attention, he didn't let it go easily. Sujin leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed, her composure untouched. But her decision had already been made. She would watch. Not interfere. Not yet. Because this wasn't a moment. It was a shift. And shifts like this revealed themselves over time. Her gaze moved once more toward Amara. Longer this time. Not dismissive. Not indifferent. Focused. Because if Kong-suk had chosen to notice her, then she was no longer invisible. And that meant one thing. The balance in the room had changed. Quietly. Slowly. But permanently. And Sujin understood something most people didn't. When attention moves in a world like theirs, it never moves without consequence. The moment didn't arrive loudly. It didn't interrupt the room. It didn't demand attention. Simply shifted. The restaurant continued as it always had. Conversations flowing, service precise. The illusion of perfection intact. But beneath it, something had already changed. Sujin felt it. Not in the way others would. But in the way someone understands when a decision has already been made, before it is spoken. Kongsuk set his glass down. Small movement. Controlled. Final. He wasn't looking at her. Not fully. That was enough. Is there something you need? Sun asked, her tone still smooth, still composed, but carrying something sharper beneath it. Kongsuk didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved. Not across the table. Not toward the room. But toward her. Amara. She was standing at a distance, speaking quietly with another table, unaware, or choosing to appear unaware, of what was about to unfold. For a moment everything held. Balanced. I'm done here. The words were calm. But they broke the structure of the night. Sujin's eyes flickered just slightly. Not shock. Recognition. Done, she repeated. Not because she didn't understand, but because she needed to hear how far it would go. Kongsuk stood. No hesitation. No explanation. Just action. The room noticed. Not immediately, but enough. Movement shifted. Attention followed. The quiet awareness of power in motion began to spread. Sujin remained seated. Still composed. Still elegant. But no longer untouched. Is this about her? She asked. This time there was no softness in the question. Only clarity. Kongsuk didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply looked at her. And in that look, the answer settled. Sujin exhaled slowly. Controlled release. Then she nodded once. Not in agreement. In understanding. You're choosing something that doesn't belong in your world, she said. Kongsuk's expression didn't change. She doesn't belong to it, he replied. The distinction was precise. Intentional. And final. Sujin's gaze dropped briefly. Then lifted again. Dark. Composed. Unbroken. Then you're choosing to change your world. Silence. 'Cause that was the truth. Kongsuk didn't respond. He didn't need to. He turned and walked. Not toward the exit. But toward the part of the room that had never been meant for him. The space where people like Amara existed. Unseen. Unacknowledged. Till now. Amara felt it before she saw it. That shift in the air. That quiet weight moving toward her. She turned. And froze. Not physically. But internally. 'Cause this was not supposed to happen. Kongsuk stopped in front of her. Close enough that the distance between them no longer protected her. Close enough that the room could no longer pretend not to notice. Her breath steadied. Her posture held. The same control she had always relied on. Now tested in a way it had never been before. Are you done for the night? He asked. The question was simple. But nothing about it was. Amara blinked once. Yes, sir. Was. Come with me. The words were quiet. But they carried something undeniable. Not a request. Not an order. A decision. The room shifted. Staff slowed. Conversations thinned. Eyes turned without turning. Sujin watched from her seat. Ill. Silent. But fully aware. Amara's grip tightened slightly at her side. This was attention. Not passing. Not accidental. Chosen. In choice. Changed everything. I can't leave my shift, she said. The words came out steady. But they weren't enough. Kongsuk's gaze didn't move. I've already handled it. Of course he had. Because men like him didn't ask for permission. They removed obstacles. Amara hesitated. Just for a second. Because this wasn't just a moment. This was a line. And stepping across it meant something she couldn't take back. But staying meant returning to a place that no longer felt the same. Kongsuk waited. Not impatient. Not uncertain. Certain. Because the decision had already been made. It was just a matter of whether she would follow it. And for the first time since the night began, Amara Okafor was no longer invisible. She was the center of a choice. And the world around her was already changing because of it. Amara didn't move immediately. The room had gone quiet in a way that didn't match the sound around it. Conversations still existed, glasses still touched tables, footsteps still crossed the floor, but none of it reached her the same way. Everything had narrowed. To him. To the space between them. To the decision waiting to be made. She had spent years learning how to stay out of moments like this. Now she was standing inside one. Kong-suk didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. His presence held the expectation in place. Steady, unshaken, inevitable. Amara glanced once, instinctively, toward the manager. He was already looking at Kong-suk. Not at her. Not at the situation. Him. And then. He nodded. Immediate. As if the outcome had never been in question. The system had adjusted. Just like that. Amara felt it settle. A shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. But complete. The rules she had learned, the boundaries she had stayed within, none of them applied the same way anymore. Because power had moved. And when it moved, everything else followed. She exhaled slowly. Not to calm herself. To understand what this meant. Leaving didn't just mean stepping away from her shift. It meant stepping out of the structure that had defined her place. The one that kept her unseen. The one that kept her safe. Kong-suk turned slightly, not looking back, not checking if she would follow. Because he already knew. That was the difference. He didn't wait for decisions. He made them. And expected the world to adjust. Amara hesitated. Just for a moment. Because this wasn't about him. It was about her. About what happened when she stopped choosing invisibility. She moved. One step. Then another. Not rushed. Not uncertain. But deliberate. The space behind her remained exactly as it had always been. Tables. Routine. A life that continued without interruption. Except now. She wasn't part of it. As she passed through the restaurant, eyes followed. Not openly. Not obviously. But enough. Staff who had never really seen her before were looking now. Guests who would have forgotten her immediately were noticing. Not because she had changed. But because of who she was walking with. That was how power worked. It didn't just elevate. It redirected attention. And right now. It was pointed at her. The doors opened. The night air met her. Cooler, quieter, untouched by the controlled environment she had just left. For a second she stopped. Not because she didn't want to continue, but because she understood something clearly. There was no returning to what she had been. Kong-suk stood ahead, waiting this time. Not far. Not distant. Just enough space for her to choose to close it. Amara stepped forward. The distance disappeared. And with it, the last part of the life she had known. He looked at her. Not the way others did. Not dismissive. Not assessing. But direct. "You're not going back there," he said. The words weren't a question. Amara held his gaze. For once. She didn't look away. "I know." Her voice was quiet. But certain. 'Cause she could feel it. A shift. Not just around her. But within her. The fear was still there. The uncertainty. The awareness of everything she didn't understand about his world. But something else had replaced what she had always relied on. Not invisibility. That was more dangerous than anything she had avoided before. Kong-suk turned, moving toward the car waiting nearby. Amara followed. Not because she was told to. But because she had decided to. And as the door closed behind her, the world she had known didn't disappear. It simply became something she no longer belonged to. Because when power changes direction, doesn't just affect where you go, changes who you are allowed to become. And Amara Okafor had just stepped into a world that would never let her be invisible again.